The United Kingdom has existed in its present state since 1922 with the creation of the Irish Free State and its cessation from the Union. So when did it first come into being? How many different versions of it have existed? And why was it created in the first place? While it might seem geographically convenient that the nations of England, Scotland, Wales and Ireland be united under one state, what seems less obvious is why, after centuries of war and animosity between them, they thought that uniting would be a good idea. Firstly, let's examine Scotland and England, since this is where the uniting of kingdoms all began. War between the two nations was present at various times between the early 11th and late 16th century, with the last formal conflict resolving in 1551. The Wars of Scottish Independence saw full-scale invasions and occupations of much of Scotland by English forces, as well as Scottish raids into northern England as far as the city of York. In 1295, shortly before the outbreak of war, the Old Alliance was created between Scotland and France, England's perpetual enemy of the medieval period. This pact lasted for the next 265 years and was invoked several times. By the time that general peace was established between Scotland and England, the royal families of both nations had been linked by marriage for several decades. When Elizabeth I died childless in 1603, the preferred choice to succeed her was James VI of Scotland, her first cousin twice removed. Several other claimants existed, but were deemed either religiously controversial, politically inappropriate, or not well connected enough to the Tudor family tree. Also, Wales was a part of England by this point. For an explanation of why, follow the link in the description to a dedicated video. Despite the history of conflict with Scotland, James was widely accepted in England. His stability as an experienced monarch, his religious moderation, and the avoidance of a succession crisis were all welcome factors. Furthermore, political tension between the nations had eased significantly by 1603, and external threats to English security now came more often from elsewhere in Europe. James's ascent to the throne joined the Kingdom of Scotland and England in a personal union, known as the Union of the Crowns. This did not make the two nations join as one sovereign state. However, the two kingdoms would be treated as a union for several functions, including foreign policy and royal succession. James described himself in a speech in 1604 as the husband and the whole isle his lawful wife, and later that year assumed the title of King of Great Britain, France and Ireland. There were worries in England that further political merging would erase English identity, and much of James's efforts were centred on uniting the churches of Scotland and England, with varying consequences. English and British monarchs had claimed sovereignty of France due to technicalities dating back to the Norman invasion, regardless of whether they actually held any land there. By the 17th century, no land in France was under de facto British rule. Ireland was already in a personal union with the Kingdom of England since the reign of Henry VIII, essentially a result of conquest over several centuries. The union persisted through James's reign and for 24 years of that of his son, Charles I, though a peaceful union it did not remain. A snowballing crisis began in 1639 with religious uprisings in Scotland, followed by the Irish Confederate Wars from 1641, the English Civil Wars from 1642, the Cromwellian conquest of Ireland from 1649, and the Anglo-Scottish War from 1650. This period is often contained as the Wars of the Three Kingdoms, and deserves covering in its own video. The wars essentially brought about the abolition of the monarchy and the creation of the Commonwealth of England. By 1653, the various wars had ceased, and the three former kingdoms were once again joined as the Commonwealth of England, Scotland, and Ireland. The unpopular and failing governments of the interregnum gave way to the restoration of the monarchy and the personal reunion of the crowns in 1660. So when did Great Britain become an established sovereign state, and why? There were many reasons for the union, and while most were in the name of mutual benefit, there were those which were essentially driven by political meddling and sabotage. One such reason was the English reaction to the Scottish Act of Security 1704, which asserted the right to choose a different successor to the throne than that of England. Fears that a Catholic or otherwise hostile monarch might rule Scotland prompted calls for a permanently unified throne. Likewise, various policies enacted by the English Parliament favoured the protection and prospering of English interests over Scottish ones, like the Acts of Navigation, which excluded non-English merchants from trading with English colonies. The 7 lean years, a period of poor harvesting, combined with war in Europe, had devastated Scottish agriculture and its economy. Up to 15% of the population is estimated to have died of hunger in the 1690s. Economic hardship prompted the creation of the Company of Scotland, also known as the Darien Company. The plan to establish a Scottish colony in modern-day Panama, known as the Darien Scheme, aimed to generate wealth outside the restrictions set by the Acts of Navigation. With around 20% of Scottish GDP invested in the scheme, its eventual failure due to disease, poor trade and attacks by other colonial powers caused a financial crisis in Scotland. England's security would be increased by having no potential enemy on its border, especially since further wars with European powers were foreseen. The final incentive was a lump sum given to Scotland, the equivalent, totalling around £400,000, over £1 billion when adjusted for relative earnings today. This was intended to ease Scotland into its share of the national debt, though much of the money went to compensating investors of the Darien Scheme. The Acts of Union were passed in 1707, making Queen Anne the first monarch of a new state, the Kingdom of Great Britain. The political merging of the nations meant that one parliament now governed the whole island of Great Britain, though some systems, including legal systems and the churches of England and Scotland, remained separate. Public opinion of the Union was mixed. In Scotland, the Union was widely interpreted as a loss of sovereignty, resulting in protests and riots among the ordinary population. The nobility of Scotland may well have shared these views in private, but greatly benefited in most cases if they supported the Union, with rewards of titles, positions and possessions. In England, the Union received a more positive, or at least lukewarm reaction. Many welcomed the security of a United Kingdom, along with the economic benefits it would bring. The next constitutional change came almost 100 years later in 1800. Ireland had been subordinate to the Kingdom of England since the late 15th century with the passing of Poyning's Law, but waxing and waning English influence in Ireland had existed since the Anglo-Norman invasion. In 1542, Henry VIII was proclaimed King of Ireland, a new title created by the Irish Parliament, though with pressure from Henry, which would be passed on to his successors. Ireland and England were therefore in personal union, not a political one at this point. However, all new Irish laws were reviewed in London before being debated in Dublin, effectively withholding sovereignty. Ireland had seen an increase in its autonomy with the Constitution of 1782, but two events in the next decade would catalyse the inclusion of Ireland in the Union. The 1793 Roman Catholic Relief Act gave the right to vote to Catholics with the necessary property requirements. Many Protestants in Ireland began to fear Catholic domination if the repeal of the penal laws continued, and the Act galvanised Catholic desire for full emancipation. The Society of United Irishmen led the Irish Rebellion of 1798, supported by French troops and radicals from England and Scotland. Rebels were inspired by the French Revolution and European values of enlightenment and liberalism. In the wake of the uprising, the British government, in an effort to stabilise the region, enacted the Acts of Union 1800, dissolving the Irish Parliament and bringing the Kingdom of Ireland into the United Kingdom, now referred to as the United Kingdom of Great Britain and Ireland, with George III continuing as sovereign of all. This came into effect on January 1, 1801. This method of bringing rebellious territories closer to the Crown was seen again, for example, in India, where after the Indian Mutiny of 1857, control of that territory was withdrawn from the East India Company and placed under Crown jurisdiction, creating the system known as the British Raj. In 1870, the Irish Home Rule movement began gathering traction among nationalists, leading to the Home Rule Bills. Two bills were almost passed by the British Parliament, one in 1886, the next in 1893, but were rejected by the Commons and Lords respectively. The third passed in 1912, leading to the Home Rule crisis in Ireland, which saw the creation of paramilitary organisations among Unionists and Nationalists. Unionists opposed the idea of Home Rule, being loyal to the Crown. Nationalists strived for not just Home Rule but independence. They proclaimed Ireland a republic during the Easter Rising in 1916 and declared Irish independence in 1919, sparking the Irish War of Independence until 1921. The partition of Ireland that year saw the creation of Northern Ireland and the self-styled Republic of Ireland. Northern Ireland, having at the time a Unionist majority, was given the opportunity to withdraw from the new Irish state, which it did through an act of its parliament. On the 6th of December 1922, the terms of the Anglo-Irish Treaty were fully implemented, creating the Irish Free State, and redrawing the UK as the United Kingdom of Great Britain and Northern Ireland. What lies in store for the UK? The terms of the Good Friday Agreement, set out in 1998, state that Northern Ireland will remain a part of the UK until a majority of people there and in the Republic wish otherwise. Northern Ireland has seen a Unionist majority for much of its history, but this is beginning to change. The percentage of the population identifying as Catholic was 45.7% at the last census in 2021, whereas Protestants had 43.5%. Of course, religious identity does not necessarily equate to political opinion or national identity. The share of nationalist versus unionist votes in Northern Ireland remains fairly stable. However, in the 2024 elections, the nationalist-leaning parties secured 9 Westminster seats to Unionist parties 8, with 1 neutral. With 7 Sinn Féin seats present, this was the first time that the Nationalist Party was the largest party in Northern Ireland. While the levels of sectarianism are not seen to the same scale in Great Britain as in Ireland, there are independence movements and parties that hold seats in Parliament, particularly in Scotland and Wales. Plaid Cymru, meaning the Party of Wales, currently holds 4 seats, equalling its best previous result. The party had aims that if they became the largest party in the Senedd in 2021, a referendum of Welsh independence would be held, though more recent statements have confirmed that this would not take place before 2030 regardless. In 2014, Scotland held a referendum on independence, with 55.3% of voters choosing to remain in the United Kingdom. However, the political landscape shifted significantly after the 2016 Brexit referendum, in which a majority in Scotland voted to remain in the EU, prompting renewed calls for a second independence vote. The United Kingdom, as it exists today, is a product of centuries of political negotiation, conflict, union and reform. Its current composition has evolved through a series of constitutional arrangements driven by economic necessities, religious tension, geopolitical strategy and the shifting tides of popular will. Understanding how and why the UK came together is essential to understanding where it might go next,